there's a little difference, isn't there, between simply an opening of the mind and the mindset of a culture or a mindset of people. It's stuff that, hey, you just do it. That's the way it's done. That's the way we do this, whatever it is. It's the way our culture sees it. That's the way we are. That's fine, but what if the mindset is actually in the way of understanding how something really happened? Or what if it's in the way of between how close you can actually get to God himself? We're going to find that Christmas is an interesting illustration in this. As I read the Christmas story, we're going to then take it and take a closer look at it and try and get beyond mindsets. Core of the Christmas story, Luke 2, 1 through 7. It reads like this, stuff you've heard. And it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. The census first took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. So all went to be registered, everyone to his own city, and Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea to the city of David, which is called, guess what, Bethlehem. Because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed wife, who was with child. So it was that while they were there, the days were completed for her to be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, when we hear this story, probably what we're hearing goes something to this effect. Mary and Joseph rush up to Bethlehem, probably December 24th, or so we would kind of assume. That's what Ron was trying to read us anyway, right, Ron? Only that was mean. I repent, Ron. I shouldn't have said that. So they rush up to Bethlehem, only to find the inn, the Bethlehem Motel 6, is all filled up, and a harried innkeeper has no room for them. The best he can do is say, we got the stable out back. Best I can do for you. So then Mary goes back there and has her firstborn child among all the animals there. She barely conceives this child, and visitors start showing up. First you have shepherds showing up, and then you have these wise men from these magi showing up, and they're kind of in stark contrast. You get these poor ragtag people, and then you have these very rich, learned people, and Jesus smiling, no crying he makes, just smiles equally at everybody, and it turns out to be a very eventful night, doesn't it? Powerful illustration, and we get all of these things in. But what happens if, in fact, we're really hearing what is actually said in Scripture through cultural filters? And we may not actually be hearing the reality of something. Now, Christianity is about truth, isn't it? So if we don't know the truth about truth, then we end up off balance, off key right there. And in this particular focus of today, prepare him room, starting with this. Prepare room in the mind itself. This big subject, the incarnation of Christ. Somehow, God, who is infinite, comes into a world that is very finite, into a very finite creature of humanity. But how did it really happen? Let's just take it apart a little bit and see what we think. First of all, December 25th? Hard to say, really. Hard to say. One group of scholars at one time thought very much, looking at the months and everything, that they thought perhaps the spring. Find another group that very, very strong thought in looking at when John the Baptist was born, because he was essentially 6 months older than Jesus, right? The time of travel, the weather conditions, the Hebrew months and observations of what they would be celebrating, and they feel that it was probably, or at least a group does, September being the most likely, and then stretching out into December, getting a little less likely, but still possibly the time. So it's possible, but Also, not very likely that we even celebrate this in the right time period. But that's fine, because the idea is not the birth date of Jesus as much as it is celebrating the birth of Jesus. So if we can stay in there. How about the timing of it all? How about the timing of it? Even one of the greatest movies I love for the Christmas story was The Nativity. Remember that? It came out a number of years back now. And remember how Jesus is born in that? They get there at the last minute, banging on doors, and it's raining, which it would have been in December, actually, and probably in the weather, if that was the time. Nobody's got room for them. They end up in a cave with animals having a baby, which was still likely. They use caves as stables. So that part not so bad. But is that really how it went down? Is that actually what the scripture even says? Tradition does, your cultural filters do, but let's take it apart a little bit. First, start with this. The Romans are having a census. This isn't their first rodeo, as the saying goes. They did this all the time. Chances are that they gave notice for the census well in advance, knowing they were moving around an entire nation of people. It wasn't going to be a last-minute affair. They would have been too well seasoned for that. So let's give them that. Let's say they at least gave fair notice for people to get where they needed to be. A lot of them on foot, so you would have to. Secondly, we have Joseph come into the picture. Imagine this, ladies, if you were having your first child and your husband knows that there's a census coming up and you're all going to have to take an 80-mile trek on probably on a donkey, and you're going to bounce up and down on that donkey for 80 miles going to this other place. Would you expect your husband, hey, I know, just to make it a little worse, let's wait until you're almost due and see if maybe you can have the donkey or have the baby on the way. Let's wait until the last possible minute and then go up to Bethlehem. And I don't know, Josh is nodding. I don't know, Josh, so that's a good sign. But imagine this. Now, that might be Josh. However, think of Joseph as he is illustrated to us through Scripture. What kind of a man was Joseph? Mary could have been, he was thinking at first, right, that he had been betrayed, that Mary had been fooling around, right? And that the penalty for that in the day was death. So Joseph, even though he felt betrayed, made special arrangements to keep it quiet. He didn't want to see her die. He's a very kind man. So would this kind man who went to this much trouble over one thing then turn around and do this last-minute trip with his wife? Not too likely. So far circumstantial. Let's move out. Let's strip away the cultural blinders just a little bit and look more into the culture at the time and what was going on. First, Middle Eastern culture. There is an etiquette, a culture of hospitality there. Not to be hospitable to someone coming to your home or whatever is the worst offense. It's a loss of faith socially. Now combine that with the fact of we're not just talking Middle East, but Middle East ancient Jews. And they're still very strong in their mind as Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And in both of those books, God commands them that they take care of the stranger and the foreigner among them. On the first service, I brought this up and said, guess why? Kudos if you could guess why God would have said this. And they didn't get it. So if you get this, then pat yourself on the back. Because so were you, talking to the Jews. They were to be kind to foreigners coming in their midst because they were once foreigners in Egypt. And because of what they went through in Egypt, as a way, don't you make that mistake. Be kind to the strangers among you. So you had this etiquette of not just socially but religiously to be hospitable. Combine that with the fact that Joseph was a native son. You know how extended families work, and if you know anything about the Middle East, extended family is a big thing. I've got an uncle here, I've got an uncle there, I've got a cousin here, I got a cousin there. It's very extended family. Joseph was a native son of Bethlehem. So the hospitality was not only for the stranger, but for family. So it's double, triple in importance. It'd be inconceivable that he would show up. We could see this happening in our culture. You decide you're going to go to Cleveland to visit relatives or celebrate, and they're out of town and you're looking for a hotel and nobody knows you and you can't get a hotel. We could see it in our culture. However, in this culture, it'd be inconceivable, a small village. This person shows up who's a native son to have no one take him in, no room for him at all. Not very likely. That's why there's not a lot of explanation to this, because the whole thing, that scenario, is not very likely in the culture. In verse 6, remember, as we read the story, it says, "So it was that while they were there, the days were completed for her to be delivered." Doesn't make a big explanation of it, because there were a number of things that were taken for granted in there. Chances are that it wasn't a last-minute thing, and we'll see why in a minute. But let's move on. Doesn't it say there was no room in the inn? Well, the answer to that is, well, yes and no. And that we might have to dig a little bit into the original language. But this was something, just to step back as an aside. Did you ever wonder about this? Maybe it's just me, because I can have weird thoughts by times. I was thinking of Bethlehem at the time was a village, just a village, and it was a backwater village. The Romans, when they came into a nation, they built major roads between everything that was important. There was no road built to Bethlehem. It was just a backwater. Can you imagine the businessman who would then open up his Motel 6 in Bethlehem? He'd be out of business in a month. There just wasn't the travel going through there. So I always had a little trouble with the idea of somebody having this inn. They must have had a second job, that's for sure. But actually it's a little different than that, because there were inns in that day, and they would be along the major throughways with the Roman roads. For example, you know the story of the Good Samaritan, how that goes. And Jesus was using a real situation or the real environment to tell a parable. But it was down to Jericho from Jerusalem, major road. Do you remember the Good Samaritan stops and gives that man a room at the inn? Well, that inn was the word in the original Greek. Pandion was an inn. It was the Motel 6 of the day. It would be that word. In the Christmas story, the word Pandion is not used. There was no room in the inn. The word that was used there is a whole other word. It's kataluma. In kataluma, it would be a very loose translation to use in with that word. That just kind of fits with our culture. You're going somewhere, what do? You stay at a hotel. So they use the word in. But a better word is guest room. A better word would be guest room. Now, kataluma could be in a couple of ways. It could be in a community sense. You had a community guest room. The best analogy I can come up this way, imagine there's a lot of travelers. Heritage Lake decides that we're going to take the activity center and bring your sleeping bag, and you can just take a spot on the floor in there. It would be a community kataluma. But more likely it was in private homes. Now remember, this is where the pieces start fitting together, is that it's a culture of hospitality. It would be a pretty poor home that did not have a guest room, a kataluma. It would have the room. What they did with it when there weren't visitors, I don't know, but they had this room, and because you would lose face if somebody showed up and, oh, I'm sorry, I've got no room. That was a serious affront. So everybody had these rooms. Fine, okay, so people had guest rooms. They had their katalumas. But it still says they weren't there. They ended up in the stable. How does that take place? Well, that takes us into another thing where we have to take off our preconceptions and see the culture. The common home, not that different in one way. If I were to show up at many of your homes, I wouldn't be surprised to see a dog or a cat running around. We think nothing of it. We live with these animals. Interesting enough, in other cultures, there are those that would say, wow, you people are really barbaric living with these animals in your home. But for us, it's nothing. We do it all the time. You go over to the Kendalls and Millie will lick your face off. I know, I've been there. I've seen that happen to me. We don't think anything of it. Well, in that day, they were even a little more pragmatic. They had their livestock, a place for their livestock to live in the home. How it worked was like this. The bottom floor would have hay, the dirt, lower level type of thing would have hay and everything. The animals would be there. Then there'd be at least a raised platform, at least something like this, I'm sure, if not an upstairs. People would live upstairs, animals kind of downstairs. If you were really styling, you might have your house built over a cave, in which case, almost like a basement. The cave could be the stable and the basement kind of all together. So the homes had the stables built into them. And then, of course, on the upper level where the people were, you had your cataluma. So you had your guest room, you had the place where people lived upstairs. Animals could be downstairs. So when we start seeing this, combine it with the whole idea of the culture, the scenario then, even the same words, this is the thing I'm getting at, even I'm not going to go off the words of the scripture that we'd read. It changes how we see them, but doesn't change a single word. The scenario probably went more like this. The census was given well in advance. Well, then Joseph is going to go up and visit his extended family in Bethlehem. They go up there, and these visits could last days, they could last weeks, even years. And so he goes up. There's all kinds of relatives. There's all kinds of catalumas to be staying at, guest rooms. And so he goes up. However, the one complication, it is a census. So it's one big family reunion. So you've got people coming from everywhere. Normally your guest room might have been open, but now it's crowded. There's lots of people. So they show up, still no big deal. They stay where they're staying. It's a crowded room, but they're all in there. Hospitality would dictate it's open. And that's fine until the days come for her to deliver her child. Now we've got a problem. You think of yourself, switch your cultural filters a little. Hospitality means everything. You've got a crowded guest room with all of these people that they're fine, they expect that they're all staying in there, but now one of them is going to have a baby. It's an extremely conservative culture. You just, you stay covered up between genders. You don't show your ankles to the other gender, that type of thing. So you have this lady who's going to have a baby, and then you have all these other guests. So you have a choice. The only open space you have now is, well, there's down with the cows and the sheep, or, the upper room. So you can either take all your other guests, send them down to the stable, or send the least number of people, which would be Mary and Joseph, and say, okay, the best we can do, here's some open room for you down here. Okay, no problem. We'll go take that room. And so they do go down, and then they end up delivering the child down there, staying in a home where the stable was part of the home. In the hospitality situation, all starts to make sense. It's all justifiable. If you were to ask, if we could go back in time and ask them at the time and say, well, why did you send the Holy Family down into the stable? Well, how did this happen? It's just the way we do it. That's our moral values. The hospitality, that's just the way we do it. That's just the way it had to come down. And it's fine because it was totally justifiable. It was totally within etiquette for the culture at the time. But the interesting thing is this, is that there was no room. Here is the Messiah in a culture that was expecting a Messiah almost to a fever pitch, especially since the Roman occupation, waiting for a Messiah. And yet when the Messiah, bottom line, when the Messiah does come, he's relegated to come into the world in the most lowest level of human space. There was no room for him among the humans. He was born in among the animals in the stable. No matter how we look at it, that's what ultimately happened. Here's what we're driving at, where a cultural mindset can put us. That made perfect sense. However, it still meant there was no room for God. It still meant there was no room for him. And so we kind of put it aside, even in our story, prepare him room. We read that line every year, there was no room for him in the inn. And our normal way of seeing the story is, well, there was this one businessman who ran an inn, and that guy made a mistake and had no room. But when we understand the cultural situation, you know what happens? An entire culture had no room. An entire mindset had no room for this Messiah coming in. And that changes everything, because when we get talking mindset, it's not just ancient and new. Now we're talking the dynamics of what happens when a group of people start thinking the same way together. So we come into our time, really not that much different. They were expecting Messiah. We are, at least as a church community, we're still expecting a Messiah. He came the first time. We should know better for the second time, but we expect for the second time. And yet, as we lament what happened in the first Christmas, how different is our mindset? How much room do we really make in our mindset? Now, not the world outside. We can't judge the world outside of the Christian community, but even within the Christian community, we want Christmas to be magical, quote unquote. That's why we do things like take a real saint or an ancient person who really existed, take his story about compassionate gifts to the helpless and the homeless, and turn it into a fat man in a red suit. And it goes from somebody who helped the least of us in compassion to, you can get everything you want if you just believe in this mythical guy. In our culture, what is the worst sin that can be committed? In the cultural mindset at Christmas time is probably not to get the right toy for your kid. You know, toys are great. But as you look at the balance of things, what happens to get that right toy? Prices go up the roof. People have been mugged to get the right toy. All in the Christmas spirit, of course. I was telling the Arnies, I know with Ashley worked in retail for a while before she switched jobs, and I always used to enjoy talking to Ashley when she would come in and around Christmas time, because there was just some scary things happen around Target and Walmart around Christmas time. Whole thing is, what then gets the room in the mindset? The mind is taken up with trying to get the right present. There's almost a hysteria over getting the right gifts. And if we were to suggest it should be another way, well, you know what? You are now the Grinch. Not to say toys are bad, but what happens when the mindset of the culture says, you know what? There's no room. Hey, that's just the way we do it. That's just the way it gets done. Here's another sacred cow, I guess, for Christmas, is it's the time for family. That's good. Well, mostly. Every time I think of Christmas, some families is wonderful they get together, but not every family. It's your duty to get together at Christmas, whether you like those people or not. I read one article at a stat it was Australia, that Christmas was the highest rate of murder. The sole reason was because all these families who really shouldn't get together, I guess, get together, and bad things happen. But it's wonderful to be reunited with family. But once again, in reality, as we look at it, when that becomes the second greatest sin in the culture when it comes to the Christmas time is not to be with family. There's a lot of planning that goes into that, isn't there? Any, especially the wives would tell you, oh, the food, the rooms, the this, the that, the cleaning up. There's a lot to get done. And that's fine, getting together with family, but what if all of that family is the top priority, squeezes out the main reason that this is happening at all? Well, it's just the way we do things. Yeah, that's the point. it's so easy to justify it. You can even sound more noble by doing it. Bottom line becomes the same thing. The very time that we're observing the Messiah, the miracle of God coming into this life, infinite into finite, how this happens, and yet, well, because of the way we do things, I'm afraid he's going to get relegated to the stable again, taking a back burner. It is so easy getting at this point when we are locked into our cultural mindset, whether it's 2,000 years ago or whether it's today, there gets to be a real problem with finding room in here for God. Not even touching other areas, just in the mind. I reiterate, it's not to pick on the culture per se. We can't blame the culture if they settle for nice sounding platitudes. That's 2,000-year-old news too. To the Corinthian church, Paul told us this, the Apostle Paul, but the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God. In ourselves, we don't. In fact, they are foolishness to him. Nor can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. So we come up with other things to fill. If this day, if we don't understand the holiness, then we fill it with other things. But here's the thing. Here you sit. You're sitting in a church. So I have a level of assumption anyway that as we at least have a propensity towards the religious side of this, towards the spiritual side. But what happens when everybody else in the culture tends to be thinking a different way? On anything, really. It doesn't have to be this. On anything. Can you help but be influenced by it? Can you help but not be affected by it? But what if the things that are affecting you are actually obstacles between you and God? Now what do? Now, what do we do? What if we can get really close to God, but some of the things we take the most for granted because that's just the way we do it, is actually in the way of getting closer to God as he lays out in Scripture. Think about it. And it doesn't have to be Christmas stuff. Christmas is just one of the illustrations. Think of how we're affected in our sexual morals, in how we observe career practices, in the consistency of faith, what we expect from a church, what we expect from God, how we understand what God expects from us. There's a reason we have consumer Christianity or prosperity gospel, or the way marriages tend to be going, or the fake idol of tolerance that's in the society in general. All these practices, just how we ignore spiritual disciplines. I mean, the idea of spending a little time with God each day is excessive in much of the culture. But if we don't spend time, how do we draw closer? One of those things that just tend to be an obstacle, so hard to avoid, the sheer volume that is coming at us all the time, on your TV, on your radio, on books you read. There's a certain way it looks at it. Very difficult not to compromise, any more than it was for that village in Bethlehem. Here's where we're coming at with this whole thing, if it is so hard. You will be swimming against the stream of the culture. You will be moving against the current of that's just how we do things. So we will have to be extremely intentional. What is the top priority? Well, that's just the way we do things, or this is the way it's laid out in Scripture. Do we do that? Are we even willing to? Do we even want to? Do we want to be intentional enough to say, look, I just want to be with the truth of it? Think of other ways that in the cultural mindset, the church itself is affected. People who would try and follow God. In the mindset, the simple fact the Bible is inerrant? No, there are no errors, at least as we talk about principle and teaching. There are no errors in Scripture. You'd be surprised at how far we in the church compromise in that idea. No. And it's all about whether I agree with it or not. not whether it's true or not whether I agree. In Scripture, one of the memory verses when we were doing the last series Paul was talking about assembling together. Remember Hebrews 10:25 says, "Do not forsake the assembling together, as is the manner of some." How seriously do we take that? One of the last statistics I looked at that said that people who attend an assembling together of worship, if they do it once a month, they consider themselves regular attenders. Even 50 years ago, we say, that's that's not. But that's kind of where we are now in the cultural mindset, to pray, to meditate on Scripture, not just read it, but meditate it, fasting. Spending personal time with God, at least a little each day. A lot of the culture, like we say, will see that as excessive, but yet that's the very things we're told according to Scripture that we're supposed to do. But it's so justifiable. It is so easy to not have room. Not just in this season. I mean, you do what you want. I mean, you know, we got our traditions. I'm not debunking anyone's traditions or theories or whatever they want to do. But what if they stand in the way of the real thing? Then what's the choice? How close do we want to get? Does it matter that there might be obstacles between us and where God would really like to take us? And a lot of it simply comes from the cultural mindset. Well, I'm not going to stop doing that. That's just the way we do it. Which takes top priority? Which is the greater authority? How much are we really willing to make room? You know, we say, oh, isn't that a shame they didn't make room in the inn for him? Yeah, too bad for them, but what about us? Not the world outside, I mean us. Do we really have the mindset? Are we really willing to make room here? That's going to affect other parts. And I'll just give you a hint on this, is where we go with the prepare him room, is the greatest commandment. We are told the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Mind actually comes last in this little vignette that Jesus says, but it is a place that we make room. And then there are the other things. How prepared are you? How prepared am I? That just take this one season, this few days of Advent that we celebrate. How prepared are we to make room in our cultural mindset?